Hello, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Jina Ragland. I am the Associate State Director of Advocacy for AARP Nebraska. Today, I'm going to give you a tutorial or an update on the Nebraska Legislature and just a basic 101 on the basics of the actual legislature itself. This video will also contain at the end, we will go into the website of the Nebraska Legislature, and I will do some clicking around to show you some of the features that are on the website that might be useful to you as an advocacy volunteer. This is a picture of the Nebraska Legislature from the 2023 session, the first session. Obviously, there are some faces that will have changed from the session going into 2024. And then also keeping in mind that in 2024, we have an election that will also be bringing new faces to the legislature as well from term limits. But it's always nice when you have the visuals to put a name with a face in the district that they represent. So that's why I'm starting off with that. I do want to give you a little bit of background. The Nebraska Legislature has been governed by a unicameral since 1937. Prior to that, it was a bicameral, but in 1937, it did pass and made it a unicameral. Nebraska is unique because it's the only unicameral of its kind in the United States. And when we say unicameral, we have a one house. The other house, obviously, then is the second house is the constituent side. We are not like any other state legislature in the sense that when bills are introduced, they go through one house, whereas in other states, we have the House side and then the Senate side. Senators themselves, we have 49 that's represented across across Nebraska. Typically, there's 40,000 constituents that are represented in the 92 counties in Nebraska. Every 10 years, there is a redistricting process that takes place with the census, and that redistricting then looks at what the population is and does the shifting in different legislative districts. We did see a pretty extreme shift in a lot of our census from the 2020 census, which again then made redistricting a little bit more challenging. There was some controversy that surrounded redistricting about where those new district lines would be drawn. And again, if you're interested in that, you can go out to the legislature's website and find that information. Senators are elected on a nonpartisan basis. So again, here in Nebraska, we have no caucuses. So it's basically whoever puts their name on the ballot for election, those two, regardless of their party, the top two move through from the general election or from the primary election to the general election, regardless of their party affiliation. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the second house for Nebraska is our actual constituents, which is you as members of the state of Nebraska, which again is why it's so important that we have constituent participation in the second house and helping legislatures understand issues and make the right choices. Qualifications to hold an office as a state senator: first and foremost, you have to be a registered voter. You have to be at least 21 years of age and have lived in the district in which he or she is running for at least 1 year prior to being elected. You can see, again, there's not a lot of qualifications, but there are a few of those that you have to meet in order to be able to run. Typically, what we've seen in Nebraska for senators, those that hold the position typically are bankers, lawyers, educators, farmers, business owners, and oftentimes retirees. There's probably a reason for that in the sense that the salary, they are a part-time employee of the state through the legislature, but their salary is only $12,000 a year, which again, the legislature runs for a short period of time during the year, but they are an elected official throughout the year. And so they are still doing business. So $12,000 annually is what they are paid for that. They do receive some per diem, and then they also receive some mileage depending on where they live in the state and how far they are from the state capital. Senators are elected to 4-year terms, they can serve 2 terms. In 2000, the legislature actually put into place a bill for term limits, which made it effective in the 2006 election year. Prior to that, there were no term limits, so we had a lot of state senators who were there for many, many years, versus now you can only serve 2 years or 2 terms, which is 8 years. And then you have to sit out if you want to run for election again. The 4-year terms are staggered depending on the year that you were elected. And so half of the legislature is up for election basically every 2 years. That can be interesting for groups that are trying to lobby an issue. The institutional knowledge with term limits oftentimes takes a toll when you have new people coming in every 8 years versus before we had term limits, people were able to come in and out and have that institutional knowledge. I also want to mention the full-time staff as part of the legislature. We have administrative assistants, legislative aides, legal counsels, committee clerks, research analysts, and many others. Typically, what you will see in a state senator's office, they do have an administrative assistant, and they typically also have a legislative aide. They may have legal counsels and committee clerks if they are chairs of specific committees within the legislature, as well as the research and analysts, depending on, again, what position they have in the legislative body. So basically, if you're a chair of a committee, you're going to have more responsibilities and more oversight, and so that will require more staff. The senator themselves does hire the full-time staff that comes in, and those, again, depending on who the state senator is, they are able to pick and choose who they have in those places. Oftentimes you will see state staff that once term limits have happened, they will move on to another office, either in the re-election district that they were a representative, or they'll move over to another state senator's district as well. The clerk of the legislature, this is very important to mention because the clerk of the legislature basically is the one that oversees the entire legislature and runs the business of the legislature. I do want to make note of Patrick O'Donnell, who was the longest running clerk in any state legislature in the country. He was the clerk of the Nebraska Legislature for 45 years before he retired last year. Brandon Metzler was appointed in 2023 for this legislative session to be the clerk of the legislature and carry out the body. Again, as I said, they are the administrative arm of the legislature. So you will see here they're responsible for ensuring that all constitutional, statutory, and policy requirements are followed when the legislature conducts its business. They also have a large job of maintaining official records of the legislative business. So the journal that's taken every day that's recorded and transposed, that is part of the clerk's office. Bill indexes for each of the bills that are introduced, the committee hearing schedules, they're all maintained through the clerk's office. The rosters of the state senators that are put out with their contact information and such, bill status information, resolutions, amendments, and of course, all the legislative histories. They also are the ones that put out the working worksheet that comes out every day that we are in the session, live legislative session, that puts the bills in the order that they will be taken up as they come out of the committee. So the legislative clerk side has a big job. Again, first and foremost, though, they're administrative arm, so they oversee pretty much everything that happens in the legislative body. You will see when you're watching live debate, or if you are at the legislature watching, the clerk is standing at the front of the legislative body, and they are running the business of what the bill introduction is and what the amendments might be filed and that sort of thing. So again, they are running to make sure the rules are followed and that things are flowing as they're supposed to be. Legislative sessions, as I said, we have different sessions every year. We do convene every year. Some states do not do that, but Nebraska is a state that has a unicameral legislative session that does go in every year. Again, it convenes on the first Wednesday following the first Monday every year. We have 90-day long sessions for the odd years. So 2023 was January to June, and then the even number years, for example, 2024 will run for a 60-day short session from January to April. So that second session, even years, is a shorter amount of time to get a lot of business done. We also have what we call special sessions that can happen, and those oftentimes are called during the interim. So when the 90-day or 60-day sessions have adjourned, during that time period after that, if there's an issue that needs to be debated, it can be called upon by the governor. Or if 2/3 of the legislature agrees to that, they can call a special session. The keys to remember with a special session, however, is it's a scope of call only. And so whatever the one issue is that they're calling the special session on, that's what they will debate on, and nothing else can be brought in. So if there's other issues that they want to bring up, those cannot be brought in as part of the special session. It has to be a one issue only. As far as bill introduction goes, the first 10 days of the legislative session is when bills can be introduced in the session, regardless if it's a 60-day or a 90-day session. Again, the 10 days. And so it's the 10 business days of the session. There may be days where they have a recess day that would not count in that first 10 days. And then the weekends, of course, do not count as well. And so again, 10 full business days is when those bills can be introduced. Individual senators can introduce their own bills, and right now they can introduce as many as they want. There has been discussion in the past about limiting the number of bills. I think the big thing is if you are going to introduce a large number of bills, it's the responsibility of the state senator to figure out what those bills, how they get through committee and running of those. So you will see there are some senators who have smaller numbers of bills, and then you will also see some that have larger counts numbers of bills. It really becomes a personal choice of what they choose to do. You also will then see committee bills that are introduced. So the 14 standing committees that we have, those typically, generally, if there's consensus from a committee member and then all the other members of the committee, they can bring a bill on behalf of the entire committee. And so it would be introduced, for example, if it's a Health and Human Services issue, it can be introduced on behalf of the Health and Human Services Committee members. And then all of those committee members would be listed on the bill. State agency bills is also another key type of bill that's introduced. Oftentimes we call these the Christmas tree or the omnibus bills because they are large, oftentimes cleanup bills that state agencies, again, will bring forward. Oftentimes you'll see a banking bill that's an omnibus bill, and maybe it's because there's been some changes in the banking industry, federal regulations or state regulations that have to be used as cleanup language. You will see oftentimes those state agency bills are the cleanup bills, but they may come out of committee, again, as a Christmas tree or an omnibus bill, meaning that there might be other bills inside the committee that are amended onto these state agency bills and passed in a larger package. As far as budget bills go, we have 3 bills that must be introduced every session. And the first of those is the legislators' salaries, constitutional officers' salaries, and then everything else that would need to be appropriated. And oftentimes you will see that last bullet, several bills will generally be introduced individually or in smaller packages instead of that third bill being as large. Generally, what you'll see from those bills then is they all have to be debated just like any other bill and for passage as well. But the salary bill, again, stands alone. Constitutional officer salaries, which is oftentimes your other elected officials and your judges, that's an independent bill as well. You can see most of the time the amendments, if there are any appropriations asks or bills that have appropriations, generally you will see them amended into that last bullet. Again, the everything else appropriated bill, where again, you usually see that come back after it's all been debated into the floor in that omnibus large bill. The last then type of bill that you will see is oftentimes, and we're seeing more and more of these, is bills that are requested or introduced at the request of the governor. And those can be on any issue. If it's an issue that the governor feels strongly on and knows he has the support of the legislative body, he can bring a bill and ask a state senator to introduce it. Oftentimes, if it's the budget bills, they will be introduced at the request of the governor, but generally those will be introduced by the speaker of the legislature. Other bills, such as revenue bills that might have some tax breaks included, those oftentimes are introduced by a member of the Revenue Committee on behalf of the governor, and that sort of thing. So you will find that usually it will follow that it's a member of the committee that introduces the bill, again, depending on what the issue is and what committee it's coming out of. As far as the number of bills that you'll see come out of session or out of each session, 400 to 700 is generally on the average of what we will see. Again, depending on whether or not it's a short session versus a long session. In 2023, we did see 820 bills. So that, again, is outside of the norm of what we normally see. It just, again, depends on how many issues people want to bring or senators want to bring. Sometimes you will see duplication of bills on the same issue, maybe one or two or three may be introduced that's the same subject as well. Again, important point to remember is short session bills the long session bills are the ones that have generally will have more bills introduced. But at the end of the session, any bill that's not dead will carry over until the next session, which is that short session. So we're working off of those, which is from 2023, those 820, roughly about 200 of those were passed. And so you're talking about another 600 have carried over And then we'll potentially see another 400 to 700 that could be introduced starting in January for the short session as well. So it's a lot of bills. Again, there's been no limitations on the number of bills that can be introduced or passed and that sort of thing. And so we tend to see a lot of bills that go through that as well. This is just a chart to show you how laws are made in the unicameral, and we've kind of talked a little bit about some of this on the top surface, but I do want to bring this again in a visual form for you to understand. The first step, of course, is bill introduction. And right now we are kind of in the period prior to that with the new session starting in January. Typically what happens is a constituent or a state senator might be hearing from someone in the community or in their legislative district about an issue, either of concern or something that needs to be changed, or areas of that just, again, need some updating in the laws or the statutes that we have. And so those issues then, once that conversation is completed, those issues then go to the state senator, who then sends that information up to the bill drafter's office, who then open up the statute and develop a draft bill that will then come back down to the state senators. If a state senator then decides that they want to take that issue on and they actually want to introduce the bill, they will look at that bill draft and make sure that there's no other changes that they want made. If there are, they will keep sending it back and forth to bill drafters until it's in what they think is a final form. Again, bill introduction would not take place then, even if the bill is ready to go now and they have a sponsor. It cannot officially be introduced in the Nebraska Legislature until the start of the next session, which again begins in January of the first of the year. Once the bill is introduced, it is then assigned to the executive board for review. And then it is assigned a number as it's introduced. And then it actually is assigned from there to the committee. The committee then will have a public hearing. And at that point, they will decide whether or not they want to advance the bill. In advancing it, obviously, you can advance it as is out of committee. You can advance it with amendments out of committee. Or you can also decide to amend it onto another bill if it's going to advance out of committee. They also have the choice to hold a bill. So they will have the committee hearing and they may decide it needs some work. And so if they're planning to not get it out of the committee. Or the other would be that they will fail and not have enough votes to get it out of committee, or they don't have the support of the committee to move it forward. Once it does, if it does advance with the green light to the floor of the legislature, it then goes on to general file. And it's the same type of process in the committee format where either it can advance, it can be amended, or it can be failed. Then again, general file, we then go on to select file, which is number 4 listed here, and then on to final reading. So those are the 3 stages of debate. Again, advancing it, amending it, or failing it in the general file on the select file side of things. If it gets to final reading, no amendments can be made at that point in time. And then finally, if it's passed on final reading, it then goes to the governor's desk for him to review and determine whether or not he's going to sign it, decline to sign it, veto it, which then would go back to the legislative body for either a veto override or they would sustain that veto. So this chart is just kind of more of a flow chart. In the next slides, we'll kind of get a little bit more into more of the details on each of those levels of debate. As far as on the committee side, it's important to remember, as I said, that bills, once they are introduced, they are signed by the executive board, also known as the reference committee. And typically what happens there is the executive board looks at the language or the topics of issue that the bill is addressing or what statute it is looking at. And depending on how the bill is written is how the executive board then determines what committee it's assigned to. We have had some controversy in the past based on how the bill is worded, whether or not which committee it will go to. Again, the senator can ask for a bill reassignment if they don't feel like it was assigned correctly to the right committee. But that also becomes a little bit more difficult once the executive board has made that decision. As I said, we have 14 standing committees, and we'll talk about those here in a couple slides also. But then once the bill again gets to those committees and it is assigned, the committee chair is actually the one that controls the hearings and the scheduling of the hearings. So basically, if it's an issue that's more favorable to the committee clerk or the committee chair, it likely could get scheduled earlier. The earlier you have a public hearing, oftentimes the better off you're going to be to move the bill out of committee get it to the floor, and then move it through the 3 levels of debate. That's not always the case. Sometimes they will hold a bill because they know they're going to amend it onto another bill that comes out of the committee. But generally, again, it just kind of depends. And a key point of all that is communication with the committee chair, making sure they understand the critical importance of why the bill is being introduced, and convincing them again that it is an important issue and moving that forward. As far as committee chairs and how they're selected, again, at the first session of the biennium, so in the odd numbers of years in that long session, the first couple days of the session, they will do a secret vote on the floor on that first day of the session, again, where committee chairs will put their names in and they will give their speeches, and then they will ask the legislative body, to determine who should be the chair of the committee. The committees on committee actually is the one that actually selects who is on each of the committees. And those are all, again, determined based on what the location of the legislative district is, based on the caucuses and that sort of thing. So there's a little bit less control of the committee on committees, in the sense of you have to be in a certain caucus, and a certain number of representatives from that caucus are what's represented on the committee, versus committee chairs have a little bit more control of, if you are able to get favorable votes in the body, you have more of a chance, again, to be a committee chair. There also are vice chairs that are also selected in the committees, that assist the committee chairs with different hearings and with the issues inside the committee. They also will take over the committee hearings if the committee chair is not able to be there. This is just a slide to show you there are other standing committees, or other committees that are in the legislature, but this typically is the 14 standing committees that you will see and hear a lot of talk about. Bills being assigned to, and then when those hearings are assigned and that sort of thing. These are listed up here in alphabetical order, and there is more information on when all of them meet. I'm not going to go over that today, but we will definitely can show you where that information is available on the website at the end of this presentation as well. Typically for ARP issues, you will more or less see us involved a lot more. We don't do a lot in the agricultural committee space, but we do a lot in appropriations, banking, commerce and insurance, business and labor, and government, military, and veterans affairs, as well as health and human services. The other committees that you might see more involvement from AARP's perspective is on the revenue side, and then the transportation and telecommunications. We also are starting to be more involved in urban affairs because of some of the housing issues that we're taking on as well. So again, depending on what issues are presented, that's not to say we won't be involved in a committee, but as I just mentioned, those are the committees you're going to see more movement and action from as well. As far as the public hearings, again, you'll remember I told you once a bill is assigned to a committee, the committee chair then has the authority to decide when they are going to schedule a bill. In Nebraska, it's important to remember all bills that are introduced will receive a public hearing. And that public hearing has to be given about a 7 days notice of when that hearing will take place. Again, this makes us very unique from other states because not every bill in every other state that's introduced is given a public hearing. And so those 820 bills that I talked about in 2023 that were introduced, it's important to remember that those bills all went through a public hearing process. And when you're working off a 90-day session and you only have so much time to get bills assigned for hearing, can make for long and cumbersome days of hearings or into the evenings and nights. We did see some limitations on the number of testifiers that could take place, which that was the choice of the chair and that sort of thing. So again, the more bills that are introduced, gets a little bit harder for those public hearings to take place, but they are required by law to receive a public hearing. As far as public testimony, and this is again where we kind of come in on our advocate side and really encourage people, you can testify on behalf of AARP, but you can also always have a voice at the table as a consumer. So public testimony is always offered and required to be offered at the public hearings. Typically, if you're going to testify in person, you get generally 3 to 5 minutes. A lot of that will be dependent on how many testifiers there are, how many other bills are up for hearing that day, and so forth. And again, a lot of that's determined at the discretion of the committee chair. So what we always tell people, if you are planning to testify in person, shoot for 3 minutes as your goal and your basis, but you can also have additional comments for the 5 minutes if you're given that, where you could insert those into that type of conversation. When you do the public testimony, there are 3 types of testimony. You'll either be supportive of the bill and testify in support, you will oppose or be in opposition, or you also have the chance to do neutrality or neutral, which is always held at the end. Written testimony and online comments is another way that you have a way to engage in public hearings. That must be submitted and verified prior to the 12 o'clock Central Time period on the last workday prior to the hearing. This was newly implemented kind of as a result of COVID. It's important for people to note that you can no longer show up the day of the hearing and have written testimony and try and turn that into the committee clerk and be included in the record. If you want to be included in the record, you either again have to testify in person or you have to submit written testimony or online comments. I am going to show you at the end also, again, if you want to do online comments, I will show you the way to do that as well. But I do think it's important for people to keep in mind and remember, you need to know when those hearings are, and you have to adhere to that 12 p.m. Deadline, the last workday prior to the hearing. Where we've seen people get into a little bit of problem is if there is a recess day on a Friday and a Monday, and the public hearing is on the following Tuesday, you would be required to have the testimony, online comments, written testimony to that online system submitted by 12 p.m. on the Thursday prior, just because the recess days on the Friday and the Monday. So again, it's very important to understand and know when the calendar period is, when the hearings take place, and also that you get online and get those submitted. The other, again, is if you miss that deadline, you can always, again, fall back and come and testify in person. And I will tell you, state senators oftentimes appreciate that in-person testimony more than anything. The difference is if you testify in person, you are put in the chair and you could be asked questions by committee members, versus if you do written testimony or online, you don't have access to that as well. The other thing I would mention is the ADA accommodations, our Americans for Disability accommodations were put into play. Those are listed on the website for the Nebraska Legislature. If someone does have an ADA disability and needs accommodations for that, there's instructions out on the website of how to acquire that. Certainly, if any of our members are ever looking for assistance with that, our office is always willing and open to help with that as well. If you need that. But generally, what you generally will do is contact the chair of the committee and ask for those special accommodations. What we have seen for accommodations in the past, if it's someone that has a disability or maybe has difficulty sitting for long periods of time or is wheelchair bound, oftentimes they will be able to go first in the testifying side of things, especially if it's a longer hearing, again, to accommodate some of those accommodations that they need. Again, public committee hearings, typically these are held in the afternoons during the first half of the session. With the pandemic and even into the 2023 session, we did see some exceptions to that. In the 2023 session, the Speaker of the Legislature, Speaker Arch, took a 2-week time period, and state senators would come and check in early in the morning, and then the remainder of the day, in the morning and the afternoon, they would run bills through public hearing those full 2 weeks. It was a lot of hearings. They got a lot of hearings done in those 2 weeks, but it also was somewhat cumbersome for state senators having to sit there for those long periods of time, sometimes 12 or 14 hours, depending on how long the day was. And then also from the advocacy side, from the lobbying side, for associations such as AARP, it was nothing sometimes to have several bills up for hearing on the same day or period of time. So you just have to do a little bit of shifting on where you can be. And again, we've had some phenomenal advocacy volunteers who have stepped in and also helped with testifying on that as well. Again, the committee hearings have regularly scheduled rooms and meeting days, and I won't go into those also here, but that information is always available out on the website, as well as the advocacy handbook, data handbook. You can look at that, and it'll also reference again and show you what days of the week certain committees meet and so forth. And as I noted also one time again, I will say there is a minimum 1-week public notice period that's required. If a public hearing is scheduled for a Friday, they would have to give public hearing notice the Friday prior to that public hearing. Again, so people in the public have a chance to make accommodations as well to get to those public hearings and as well as provide comment. Floor votes and amendments. So now we're kind of shifting over once we've gone through the committee process and we have the bill hearing that's taken place. And if you recall back from the visual that I showed you, again, once we get to committees, they have an option to advance the bill. Again, advancing it as is with no amendments. They can advance it with amendments to the bill, or the other option oftentimes we see is they advance it and amend it into another larger bill that then moves it to the floor. If that's the case, then it is assigned to in the worksheet order again through the clerk's office, and then the priority designations are made and that sort of thing. If it gets to the floor, the first round of debate is what we call, again, that general file. And I do have listed up here, this is a time period when amendments can be made on the bill itself. And that's important to keep in mind. Oftentimes you will see a lot of amendments that are filed on a bill. If you see a large number of those, you can almost guess that there's probably going to be a filibuster because someone in the body or a large number of senators may not like the bill and are trying to filibuster it so it doesn't pass. That first level of debate, again, debate general file, it requires 8 hours of debate. It requires 25 votes to advance. And then if it is a filibuster and it goes the full 8 hours, it's 33 votes to overcome the filibuster, which is what we call the cloture vote. If they receive that, then they will then move it on to select file. Select file is the second level of debate. And again, you'll see in parentheses, this is where amendments can also continue to be made on the bill. Again, you potentially, if it's a filibuster bill, you'll probably see a lot of amendments that are filed. And a lot of that reasoning is it's taking up time to accommodate the time limits that are on there, which then forces the bill to go to a cloture vote. Cloture vote always, again, with that filibuster, requires more votes to pass. So on select file, the second level, it only requires 4 hours of debate before they take a vote. They can stop debating before the 4 hours, but if it is, again, an attempt to filibuster, it would go the full 4 hours. And at that time, they would have to call cloture vote, and 33 votes, again, would be required to overcome the filibuster. From select file, that's then held over and it will then proceed and move into final reading. And this is important. You'll see in parentheses here, you can't amend a bill on final reading. If you do and make amendment, it has to go back to select file, which then would require it to go back where it could go through another 4 hours of debate. So once a bill gets to final reading, the assumption is it's been cleaned up with a select file and general file amendments. And it is on final reading. And again, there are no amendments can be made. But if you do make amendments, again, it goes back to select file for that level of debate. 2 hours of debates, what the most that can be required on final reading. Sometimes you will not see that. Sometimes it will just pass with no debate. But again, if it's a bill that's more contentious, you could potentially see 2 more hours of debate. So if you do the math and add it all up, obviously 14 hours is the total number of hours that can be debated on a bill. If it's a one subject bill, obviously that's a lot of debate on one issue. But typically what we've seen over the last session is we saw a lot of bills that were amended into one large bill. Still the number, no matter how many bills are amended into there, the number of debate hours still remains the same. Again, 2 hours of debate for it to advance, 24 or 25 votes to advance it. Again, if it goes to a filibuster and goes the full 2 hours, the cloture vote is called, and then 33 votes would be required again to overcome the filibuster. If they succeed with that, it then goes to the governor for approval. Once the bill gets to his office, he has 5 days to review and approve or veto the bill. It's important to note that excludes Sunday. Saturday is included in that. And so the time clock starts as soon as that bill gets delivered and presented to his office. They have 5 days to review it and approve it again or veto it. It does take 30 votes, which is 3/5 of the body, to override a veto. Again, if that's applicable. If the governor sends something back with a veto, again, it would require those 30 votes to overturn that. As far as if it's passage or if it's overturned and it does pass from there, there are different effective dates on different bills depending on whether or not they have an emergency clause or not. If they do not contain an emergency clause, which is what we call an E clause, that bill will become effective 90 days from the date that the legislature adjourned. If it does have an E clause, it's an emergency again, it would become effective the day after the bill is signed or if there's notation inside of a bill, say, for instance, a bill becomes effective with a change on January 1st of 2024. If it's written inside the bill, even with an emergency clause, they go by whatever the date's written inside of the bill language. As far as amendments, again, on general file, select file, I want to make notes that they must be germane and filed throughout the debate process. What germaneness means is it has to apply to whatever the issue is. And so, and this got a little bit, probably a little sketchy this year of whether or not amendments and things that were being, again, amended onto larger bills, whether or not they were germane. Generally, it's the one subject rule. If you open up statutes, there's lots of things that you can amend on there for germaneness. But again, you have to be a little bit creative, and it can be challenged. That's not happened much in the past, but basically, if you're filing an amendment, it has to be specifically related to the bill and the issue and the statute that you're trying to address and open up. More bills. I also want to bring reference. Oftentimes when you bring a bill, there is often a fiscal note or a fiscal impact that will come along with the bill. And so once your bill starts moving through the process, then an A bill has to be filed, which is an A for the appropriations or the fiscal. Again, it cannot pass, a bill cannot pass unless an A bill is filed and the A bill also goes through the debate process and is passed. Because obviously, if you don't have the approval of the appropriations to fund it, there's no way that you can implement the new law or the new rule. So you will oftentimes see, for instance, LB 92, it gets through the process, and before it can pass on final reading, or once it passes final reading, then an A bill is debated and addressed, again, that contains specifically the fiscal note, so it's ensured that it's earmarked inside of the budget. There are also priority bill designations that can be made, and these are by Speaker of the House or Speaker of the Legislature, senators themselves, and then committee members. The Speaker of the Legislature can have up to 25 bills that can be put on a speaker priority list. Each senator has one speaker or one senator priority bill, and then each committee, so those 14 committees plus other committees, can have up to 2 bills that are deemed a priority designation. Regardless of what session is, whether it's short or long day or long session, basically those priority bills are supposed to rise to the top and get debated prior to any other regular bills. You also sometimes will see those priority bills may get other bills that are amended into them. And the reason for that is many people understand that priority bills have priority. And so those potentially could move through as well. Again, when they're identified in the long session, so the even number of years, or excuse me, the odd numbers of years is by day 45. And then in short sessions, which is the even number of years coming up, day 30 is when those speaker priorities, senator priorities, and committee priorities have to be signed. As I have listed here, in 2023, there were 120 priority bill designations between the speaker, the senators themselves, as well as the committee. And I have again listed specifically for you the numbers of those that can be identified. Emergency E-clauses, again, we've talked about those. If a bill has an E-clause, it obviously will have immediate passage versus if it's a regular bill, it's that 90-day period. We also have constitutional amendments that can be filed and go through the process. They require more votes to actually get passed out of committee and get passed in the legislature. If they receive enough votes to be passed, then constitutional amendments then would automatically be put on the ballot through the legislative process. Once we get through the priority bills, there also is a time period where state senators then have the option to introduce what we call legislative resolutions or interim studies. These take place, they're introduced during the session, assigned to committees, and then during the interim study hearing process period, which is what we're in right now. Once the legislature ends or adjourns sine die, they then start looking at interim studies. Typically, what these resolutions and interim studies are is a time period where they want to study a particular issue. And so instead of introducing a bill, they're introducing a study so that the committees can pull people together and talk about an issue, figure out whether or not it's an issue that needs to be addressed with some legislative changes, or just bringing all the groups together on a bill that may have been introduced that they can't find resolution on. And so they're going to study it and bring those priority groups together to figure out what they can do to address and maybe make some amendments moving into the next session. What we have listed up here is the Nebraska Legislature's website and the live stream. Again, I'm going to go to that live web page here in a moment, but it's important to have reference if you're looking to learn more about the legislative process and the Nebraska Legislature. It's probably a good website for you to have bookmarked on your computer that you can go to. The live stream is also available. You can tune in every day that the legislature is in session for the live floor debate, as well as any public hearings that are taking place. You can always find those as well. And again, here in a bit, I will show you how to reach those as well. This is just a screenshot to show you the legislature's webpage. Again, if you look back, this www or https with the nebraskalegislature.gov is the website that you would go to receive this information. So again, I'm going to take you to a page here shortly live that we will go through, and I'll kind of walk you through some of the features that are available on the website as well. Okay, great. As I said, again, this is the Nebraska Legislature's website. Again, there's a lot of different information that's available on the website. And I do challenge you again is to kind of, when you have a chance, go out to the website and just start clicking through different tabs and looking at how many layers there are behind all of that. First and foremost, I think what's most important, you'll see on the homepage, obviously the legislature, as we are recording this today, is not in session, so they're in sine die, and again will not resume until the January 2024 legislative time period. Once that we go into session, you will see, similar to the slide I just showed you, it will show you what day it is and what day of the legislative session that they're going into and that sort of thing. Again, the homepage will always take you back to this front page. If you ever get stuck and you aren't sure how to get back to where you were, you can always click on the home. It'll take you back to this front page. As far as the chamber viewer, I'm going to click on that. This again is more important when they are in the legislative session and doing business. If you click on chamber viewer when they're in the session, it will tell you what bill they're debating on the floor at the time. So if you've not been able to tune in until a later point in the day and there's a whole long agenda list, you can go to chamber viewer, and again, it'll tell you what bills or what bill they're specifically debating at that point in time. You can also view bills. The one-liners, again, will give you just the top line of a certain bill of what the subject matter is. If you want to link to the statutes, you can click on the statutes. It'll also give you a summary of different bills. A hearing tab, which we'll go through and I'll show you how to get to the public hearings to view that. Agendas for the day. Again, if you're looking for a specific agenda for a certain day, you can click on there and it'll take you to the calendar and you can select that at that point in time. The journal, I think this is really important, and this gets to be a very large 10,000 page document. This is just a running document of all that's going on in the legislature during the session. So every time they're in session, the journal is running, it's recording, and it's being transposed. So if you want to reference back to a certain day when a bill was being debated about something that was said, you can actually go to the journal and you can reference back and find that information. There's also a budget page if you're interested in looking at the budget that's either being proposed or what's came out in final. You can look at that. The rule book is becoming more and more important for people to understand also as we start seeing proposed changes to the rules on the floor with debate. That's an important piece also that you understand. I would make note, the rule book does change depending on each session. We probably likely will see in 2024 some rule book changes and proposals that go through based off of things that have happened in the 2023 session. So again, every session there is a rule debate that can take place. Senators can file for rule changes, which then the Rules Committee will have public hearings on and so forth. And then those rules will be taken to the floor for debate as well. If you're interested in looking at the Nebraska Constitution, you also can go to this link and click on there and it'll take you to that as well. On the legislative side, again, this has more informational on a lot of things. If you want to learn more about the legislature, again, you can click on the About. If you want to learn how the budget process takes place, that's obviously what this tab is. History of the unicameral, which is quite fascinating. If once you start getting inside of some of those tabs, there are some videos, there are some really great resources and guides that have been developed that kind of walk through the layman's terms of the history of the unicameral. Lawmaking in Nebraska, again, this gives you some of the background about, again, how bills are made, how they're passed through, some of the history making on that as well. Maps, this is important too if you're looking for what the legislative division lines might be for your state senator or for a specific legislative district. A lot of these, well, all of these have been updated since the 2020 census with the redistricting. This is where you can go and visit maps, and again, it'll show you what those districting looks like, not just in the legislative side, but on other levels of elected offices inside of the Nebraska legislature. Photos, again, a lot of these photos are pictures of state senators. If you want to look at that, again, publications, there are publications you can print off yourself, or you can order those, or you can pick them up inside the Capitol in different locations. And so again, there are some really great publications. I would challenge you to look at that as well. Senator qualifications, we've already kind of discussed that. If someone's interested in being a senator, here's some more guidance for them to look at as well. We do have student programs inside the legislature, not only on the page, the legislative page side of things, but also there are student programs for our high school students, as well as even our fourth grade students who oftentimes come and visit the Capitol or tour the Capitol. There's more information available there. If you're looking at more pointers or tips for testifying at a hearing, you can also find information here. There is a nice brochure that's also available on the website that you can print off if you want more guidance on that. The other thing, and I'm going to actually take you to this next page, is the unicameral update. And there it is, the unicameral update. This is the actual newsletter media that there are reporters inside the unicameral that are doing updates on stories, either on floor debate, or if it's a committee hearing, or as you'll see here, this is an article story on Senator Meyer, who's now been appointed to represent District 41. I would encourage people to get a subscription to this. It's free, and you can subscribe through the email updates, which by putting in your email address and hitting subscribe. It will give you updates on all the stories once they've been written and developed. You will get those in your email inbox. That kind of gives you a summary of what has happened, or what different stories or senators that are being highlighted and such. So it's another way to just be in the know outside of the public media. Again, this is a unicameral update. Again, the media side of inside the state capitol, that I would encourage you to do that. Calendar, again, I'm going to click here and just show you. This takes you to the legislative calendar. Again, you will see here, you can click and get the session calendar if you're curious about what's going on in the legislature. I'll show you that real quick here. This is the calendar. Again, the dates that they are in session, as well as when the recess days are. You can print this off. It shows you the federal and state holidays, as well as when those recess days are. Again, we've provided this and will continue to provide this to all volunteers in our email newsletter that comes out weekly, but also in your handbook, advocacy handbook. If you are an advocacy volunteer, you'll be receiving an updated version of that every year at the lobby week events that we have. If you are, again, you can look, depending on what month you want to look at, it'll take you clear back. If you want to go back into session, it'll take you back to what hearings were taking place, and then you can look from there. You can also go off of the years, identify what those are, and then the hit go, and it'll take you directly to that calendar. Or you can go back on the tabs here. I do want to show you, just as reference, when I was talking about, we'll just go to November 28th for hearings. This is an example. Now, keep in mind, these are interim study hearings. These are not actual bills, but it's the same concept of if you have a bill that's coming up and you're interested in it, and you know that you can't be there to submit or to do testimony in person, but you want to submit an online comment. This is what I was referencing earlier in my presentation. This was where you'll go to actually file that information. or you can actually go out to the interim study page and do it as well. But for this example, LR 166, the hearing is taking place on November 28th at 9:30 in the education room, which is hearing room 1525. The introducer, Senator Walz. You can add this to your calendar. It will populate to your, whether it's your Outlook or whatever else, and you can import it in directly into your calendar. Again, if you want to submit online comments on this particular interim study, you will click on the Submit Online Comments, and there is, again, a disclosure. So you will click I understand, and then you'll go back, and this is actually the form and the page that you will fill out and complete in order for your comments to be submitted. Keeping in mind, again, this is the 12 p.m. You'll see here the deadline to submit and verify a comment for the hearing record is Monday, November 27th at 12 p.m. Central Time. Again, in the interim study period, we don't have any recess days right now. So it's always the noon prior to whatever the hearing date is, which again was November 28th. So it's important that you keep that in mind, and it will tell you on every either resolution or bill that you're trying to submit, you will see that information and know when that information has to be submitted. Filling in going to the fields to fill them in. Do you want your comments included in the hearing record? More times than not, it seems like if you're taking the time to submit those comments, it only would make sense that it's part of the public hearing record. Some people choose not to, but again, I will tell you all of these comments are populated to a spreadsheet based on the resolution, the specific hearing, or the bill itself. And so senators actually can go and look at this. So whether or not they take themselves to look at that is one thing. If it's included in the hearing record, you're probably going to have a better chance that senators are going to see your comments. So generally, I would encourage you to click yes, that you do want it included in the hearing record. Again, first name, last name, your street address, city, state, zip code. And it is important, you do have to include an email address. And the reason for that is this red note here. To confirm your submission, a link from the Nebraska Legislature with a subject line or verifying your written comment for LR 166 will be sent to this email. So once you've filled this in and you've clicked submit, you will get an email that asks you to verify that you are who you say you are and that you did actually submit. This is actually a way that they're trying to rule out any spam and make sure that it is an actual person that is submitting a comment. So again, email address is important to have there. And it's very important that you be looking in your email once you've submitted your comments so you can verify that it is your comments and that you do want them to go forward. If you do not verify your comments, they will not be submitted. Then you will list whether or not what district you live in. Again, 1 through 49 is listed here. If you don't know what legislative district you're in, you can click the Find Your District. And again, this is where you'll enter your address, your city, state, and zip code. And I will just do that real quickly here to show you what I'm talking about. And you will see here, it's identified. I just put in the AARP office address at 301 South 13th Street, Lincoln, Nebraska, 68508. And you're actually it identifies us in District 28, which is what you would identify then. So it says, click the button below to enter your district into the form. So I would click District 28, and then it will populate that for you. You don't need to worry about being a registered lobbyist because none of you would be submitting anything as a volunteer under that form. You would always submit something under your own personal district. Then you will list who you're representing, whether or not it's yourself or other. Again, 99% of the time you would list yourself as self. You will then list, are you a proponent? Do you support the bill or the interim study? Do you oppose it as an opponent, or are you coming in as neutral? And so you will have to click one of those. Then the last thing that you'll be required to do is where you will enter your written comments or your statements. It is important to know that there is 500-word limits on the written statements. And so again, that can be a little bit difficult for some people, but it really does make you, prioritize what your thoughts and your comments are. And again, once you get to 500, you're not able to paste or to put any more in there. You can copy and paste from a Word doc. So if you want to type something up on your Microsoft Word, and you want to copy and paste it in here, you can do that as well. I do Remind people, though, you might want to check your work and how it copies and pastes, because sometimes the formatting is not quite like you thought it would be. Once that is done, then you will come down and you'll click that you're not a robot, and then you will click submit your comment. Then you will get a pop-up that says, your comment has been submitted, but it reminds you to check your email, because that's when that verification piece will come. Again, go over to your email and click and verify that you did submit. And once you do that, then this will be submitted as your online comments. So I think that's walking you through specifically that written comment form that we were talking about earlier. As far as the disability accommodation testimony, again, I'm going to click on that real quickly here to show you what I was referencing earlier when we were going through that. Again, if you have, you need some kind of American with Disabilities Act accommodation, this is the place to go to do that. Again, there is an affirmation that you will click on. Same thing. Basically, the form is the same thing. But you also, again, if you have special requests, you also can, again, upload a PDF here. This is different than if you're just submitting. But you can also, put in here if you need special accommodations and so forth at a public hearing. Same thing, you'd click again, submit testimony, and it'll go back and you'll have to verify that from that point in time. Okay, I'm going to go back now. Again, that was the calendar, and I kind of walked you again specifically through submitting some online comments. While we're talking about that, I also want to show you another way that you can do that over here in the search current bills. I'm just going to randomly put in LB 92 and search for that. Again, because the session has already passed and we're not in the public hearing period, you will not be able to see this on here. But I did want to bring you to a bill page to show you specifically if we were in a public hearing time period and they were accepting public comments, the same sort of thing would be available here, where basically in this tan colored line, you could submit your comments from the bill page as well. Again, we're not able to show you that right now due to being in the interim, but that's what this is. I do want to walk you through quickly, just again, an example of a bill page. As a bill is introduced, again, it's given the bill number. This is the title of the bill. The document information, who introduced it. So in this case, it was Senator Julie Slama. When did she introduce it is listed here. And then the text copies, as bills start going through the different processes of debate, you'll start seeing more information here. Generally, during the session, you're only going to see introduced until it actually is in passage. So if you click on introduced, it will take you to a copy of how the bill was introduced again on the floor. And you will see that here outlined. And then under additional information, statement of intent, this is required before every public hearing. The bill introducer has to provide a public statement of what the intent is of the bill. And so you'll see here again, sometimes it's longer depending on the senator, but for the most part, it just gives you a couple sentences of what the legislation is and what they're trying to do. Committee statements, those are only issued if a bill actually gets out of committee and is going to the floor. An example again of this, it will show the hearing date, who the committee was, again, the introducer. The one-liner again is just what's the title basically of what the bill is that they're trying to pass. And then it will show you the actual bill vote results as it comes out of committee. In this case, 8 of the senators all voted yes to move the bill out of committee. There were no votes in opposition, no one was absent, and no one was present not voting. So that's this is a success. You always want to see everyone voting to get a bill out versus no votes or absent or present not voting. Then it'll go through on the testimony side and show you who testified as proponents. In this case, the bill introducer always is listed first. They'll say who they're representing. Other proponents will be listed again with their representation. If there are opponents, they'll be listed here in the same fashion as the proponents as well as on the neutral. Again, the ADA accommodation written testimony, if there's anyone that's doing that, they'll be listed here as well. A summary of the purpose of the bill. Again, it'll show how the bill was introduced and what the bill was trying to do as introduced. If there are amendments, which we've talked about, generally this is an example of that. the committee amendments, which is AM 484, it will show you that LB 92 was introduced, but the committee is proposing an amendment to be made to the bill as it goes to the floor. And then you can kind of read down and it'll show you what all those amendments are and so forth. Again, a list of oral testimony, again, proponents under a certain bill. LB 145 was amended in here, so that will be listed also. Again, the voting results on the bill. And this is a very long committee statement, so I'm not going to go through all of this. But this is just an example of a committee statement where LB 92 was the omnibus bill, and there were several bills that were amended onto that. And so as part of the committee statement, each of those bills that are amended on, you will find within here with the amendments and how they were amended on there. The other thing, the fiscal note, every bill is also given a fiscal note, depending on when the hearing is scheduled. Generally, you will see the fiscal note either put up the day before or the day of the hearing. As amendments are made, you'll see these each fiscal note's reassigned based on if another bill is amended onto that changes obviously the fiscal note. And you can look through each of those as well. Viewing all recorded votes, I think this is important also. This is once the bill gets to the floor. You can see, again, the recorded votes, the levels of debate, the general file, again, what motion was made, what were the vote totals. And if you want to get even deeper into that and see how your individual senator voted, you can click on the view details and it'll take you through each of those as well. I'm going to go back to the text copies, the final reading and the slip law. So final reading is what's presented on the floor, again, in final form where no amendments have been made, and they're voting on that last piece as it gets passage. What's important, if you're ever looking, and I will show you this, slip law is what you want to click on for the final version of any bill that was ever passed. So if you click on the slip law, and sometimes these get a little hard to read in the sense that they're kind of jammed together. But this, as approved by the governor on June 6, 2023, this is what LB 92 looks like as it goes into final form for passage for law. And so again, you can see this contains all the amendments, all the bills, all the statutes, everything that was amended in LB 92 is all comprehensively made here. So if you are looking, knowing that a bill was amended into something in final form and passage, this is where you would go to look, not back into the introduced, sometimes not even final reading, because the slip law copy is going to show you what the final form is. The last thing I'll mention on this page, again, and history is kind of important too if you're really trying to follow a bill very closely. If you look here at the bottom of this page, you can again see the order of how things took place with this particular bill. So January 6th is, of course, when the bill was introduced. Then January 10th is when it was referred to the Banking Committee. And then it got scheduled for hearing on January 13th. The hearing was scheduled for January 24th. So you'll see again that this gave more than the 7-day notice, but again, it'll show you that. And then following the hearing, it was finally placed on final reading with general file with that amendment that we talked about on February 24th. And then again, as you just keep going up, again, you'll see there were motions that were filed, there were amendments that were filed. Again, this bill didn't have a lot of, I wouldn't say they had much opposition, but this is just an example where those motions that were filed by particular senators were more or less to slow things down in the legislature and slow some of the debate down. So they may not particularly been to stop the bill itself, but to keep more conversation going. So debate for other bills would slow down on the floor as well. So again, this is a kind of a critically important place if you're looking to see as things move through. You can kind of see the order, the dates. And again, if you're following a particular bill, this is somewhere I would advise you go to the bill page and it'll kind of give you what the current status of the bill is as well. Again, placed on final reading on May 2nd, and then it passed on final reading on May 30th. And then it went to the governor on June 1st and he approved it on June 6th. And so the next things you'll see is the June 1st, the provisions and portions of, and this is the list of all the bills that were amended into LB 92 this session. So it'll give you the original bill, how the final bill of 92, and then the amendment that it was filed by. So a lot of information here, but I think it's important because sometimes I think we take for granted that not everyone quite understands that process. So it's important, go out to bill pages and kind of explore around and see what else you can find there. If you're looking for past laws to search, you can browse statutes by chapter, or you can just type in a specific topic or issue and click, and it'll take you out to all the laws that are in the legislative body. If you're looking for past legislation, you would again click on here. It will take you to this page and search by number. Generally, you have to know the bill number, so you'd put that number in here. And then it's important, if it's past legislation, you have to know which session that it was in. But then it'll take you back for some of that history on that. You can also search by different things: date of introduction, introducer, past senator, committee referral, keyword. There's different ways to find it, but you're going to most likely have the best luck if you know what the bill number was and what session it was. The next things I want to talk to you about real quickly on the senator tab over here. Again, if you're looking to get information about your state senator, or maybe you aren't sure who your senator is, this is another way that you can go in through the website to find that. If you click on senators landing pages, this will take you specifically to every senator by district. And again, this, you can sort it by district if you want, but typically when you go to this page, it's sorted by their last name alphabetically. And I'm just going to, let's just pick on Tom Brandt, Senator or District 32. So I clicked on him, and this brought up his bio page. Here's his photo. It gives his district number. Here's his room location, address, phone number if you want to contact his office, and then also his email address. I will tell you, this is the only way you're going to find an email address for a state senator, is actually going directly into their page. They don't make it available any other way. So if you are not able to find it in any of the materials that we've given you, you can always quick reference go out and find it on the legislature's website. It also will list here for you committee assignments. What committees is he on? Those are all listed here. And then every page has a resource page. So again, his official photos, different photos that have been taken and that sort of thing, you can all find those here. Bills introduced in the current session. So again, from 2023, as we move into 2024, that will give you a list there. I'll show you that. These are all the bills that Senator Brandt has introduced. All bills that he's ever introduced in his entire time in the legislature. Again, he is getting to the end of his term. He was reelected in 2022. So you will see here, he has a pretty long list of bills that he has introduced while he hasn't been in the legislature. A map of his district. Again, this is another way to get to a map if you're looking to determine whether or not you were affected by redistricting and that sort of thing, or if you just want to know what his legislative district looks like. And every state senator has this map based on their legislative district. The unicameral update coverage. Again, this is that newsletter I was talking about. Every time an article is written about them and they're tagged in it, that will take you directly to any of those articles that they were featured in. Some of them also have a blog, and you can click on that. Senator Brandt, the last time that he wrote on his blog was January 4th, earlier this year. I would say he's probably not one that keeps it updated, but a lot of state senators do, and so you can always check that on your state senator page as well. Okay. So again, the other thing under the senator tab, I wanted to remind you, if you want to go to the speakers page, you can click there. That'll take you directly to Speaker Arch's speaker page. But probably the most important thing, again, and I did kind of already do this when we were talking about trying to figure out when you're submitting written testimony where to go. But if you don't know who your state senator is and you want to find them, you'll just click here on your Find Your Senator. And again, you will enter that same your same address or whatever address you're trying to find. And I'm going to just type that in and show you that here again as well. And as I said, again, it brings up District 28 for the AARP state office. And then the photo to the side, of course, is Senator Jane Raybould in District 28, represents based on that zip code. So you can kind of mess around with this. I will tell you, a lot of zip codes will overlap. And so it's really important that you put your correct address in there as well. The other thing, once you get here, then you want to go to Senator Raybold's page, you click on the landing page and it'll take you directly there as well. Transcripts, again, I'm not going to go into detail on that, but it is another tab. If you're looking for specific transcripts on a specific bill or hearing or something like that, you can click there. You can also request transcripts be sent to you. Again, that's probably something you're less inclined to go to, but it's important to know. The last thing on the side, agencies, citizens, journalists, lobbyists, students, and teachers. Again, this is another area we won't have the time or capacity to go into today, but I would challenge you to go out and look through each of these pages because there are layers and layers of great educational resources, brochures, tips and pointers. If you're looking for historical perspectives, there's lots of great things. And I especially love the citizens and the students and teachers page, because if you have young children also or grandchildren that might want to be involved, there's some really great publications listed in there as well. The last thing I want to go through then, again, on this center section, a lot of this you probably will find over on this side, but these are more earmarked specifically once you become a little more familiar with the web page. When you log in every day and you're looking at things, there will be if they are in session, the date. So for instance, January 5th, they will be in session. Instead of the first session has adjourned sine die, that date will be listed here. And you can actually click on that and it'll actually take you to that day's page of events of what's happening. And so you can get more specific details for the day. Again, the legislative calendar for 2024 here's another way to find that if you're looking for that information. It'll pop up here. You can see that. Again, you can print any of these things off. The committee report for tax rate review, the biennial budget report, again, carryover resolutions and bills, interim study listings. Again, we don't really have the time or capacity today to go through each of these tabs, but this is another great way for you to kind of start looking and becoming more comfortable with what that page looks like. One thing that will be important as we go into the 2024 session, again, introduce legislation, an even priority bill. But as bills are introduced, each day you can go into introduce legislation and it'll show you the running list from days 1 through 10. Or if you want to specifically look at the legislation that's been introduced on, say, day 5, you can specifically go to day 5 and it'll show you all of those from that day as well. Again, it breaks things down by the day that they were introduced. And so it's a little less cumbersome than if you're looking at the entire list of legislation. I will show you real quickly. This is from the 2023 session, starting with LB1. Obviously, several pages here because we had, the 820 bills that were introduced. So you get the gist of what I'm doing here. It will show you all of those. It is important too, if you don't know the bill number specifically, but maybe you knew who the senator was, you can kind of find that as the introducer. You can do sorting in these columns, either by document, introducer, status, description, and what have you. If you want to do a printer-friendly version, you can click on that. And it'll actually print things out in a more unified manner, and you can print that off as well with the full listing. The other is you can click on the bill number and it'll again take you to the bill page, which we've went through what that looks like. Again, primary introducer, if you click on that, let's click on LB2, it should take me to Senator Sanders' page, again, of all the bills that she has introduced. The status, again, if you're curious where a bill is at currently, for instance, LB2 is Senator Sanders. This is still in referral, so it's not gotten out of committee. It's still sitting there. The descriptor then will give you, again, those one-liners, one subject about what it is introducing. You also can download these lists as well if you choose to do that. After adjournment worksheet, again, this is just an example to show you, again, where bills are at currently. This is that worksheet that I was talking to you about. Every day, this worksheet is updated during session. This is what they will be working off of for 2024. And so if you have a bill on general file, it should be listed in here. Again, where it's listed is kind of what we call, again, worksheet order. So LB 184, unless it's prioritized, will be debated way later than LB 147, for example, because of how it's listed on worksheet order. Committee on Committees report is also listed here. Priority bills, you can click on that. It'll give you that specific list. Again, if you're looking for a senator list, the roster, we do include this again in the document or the booklet that we give you for the advocacy handbook. But if you want it directly off the website, you can also find it here. And again, you can either get it alphabetically listed, or the second page again will be listed by the district. Their name, their phone number, what room they're in, and then what city they reside in. The mailing address is always listed on here also. I wish they would add the email address on here, but they don't. But I can tell you, if you reference back to our advocacy handbook, we do include that information for you on there as well. In closing then, hearing schedules, again, we've talked about, you can go here also to find what the hearings are going to be. If you want to look at the schedule for the entire week, you would click here. Next week, or if you want to do a range of dates and say you want to look at January, we'll just do January 2nd of 2023 through, let's do March 3rd of 2023 and hit view hearings. This again, and this is last session, but it will give you the running list by committee, what room, the date, the time, and it'll give you all of those. Again, this is another way you can go in and hit the submit comment online, which again, these generally, you won't be able to do that at this point in time because those aren't active bills. But here's another way that you can actually go into that system. And again, those are updated on a weekly basis, so you can see that as well. The last thing I'll mention, and then we will kind of wrap things up here for this session. If you are interested again in watching the sessions as they go into session in January, and you want to watch the floor debate, or you want to watch the afternoon committee hearings, this is where you'll go over here to this live video streaming, and you'll click on the Nebraska Public Media button. And then it'll show you what's going live. And where you want to go then is you'll scroll down. And generally in this area, when legislature's in session, it will have listed if it's, the floor debate for the day for the legislature, you'll click on that. And it'll actually take you to the rotunda, to the actual floor debate. If you're looking for a committee hearing, that will be listed also out here as well. But this is the site where you can go. You can download the app on your phone or on your iPad and watch it there, or you can go through the browser. Again, it's really easy if you go through the live streaming through the website as well. So again, that's another way if you're interested in just having it on and listening. You also, again, can watch it through your cable stations too if you're interested in that as well. All right. I think that kind of concludes our discussion today. That gives you a very broad oversight of the Nebraska Legislature, a 101 on how laws are made, what's the process that we go through, what's some of the background for you as advocacy volunteers as you're beginning to either be a new volunteer in advocating, or maybe you've been around for a long time and trying to give you some things to walk through that maybe you weren't aware of on that side of things. I do appreciate everyone tuning in today. Appreciate your time. Most importantly, appreciate you being on with us today. This will be recorded and also be available on the volunteer portal if you're interested in looking on that as well. As always, if you do have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to our office, and I will put that up here. All right. I thank you for joining us today. Again, appreciate and look forward to the next session. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.